I wish to present the report and draft decision for the Committee of Heads of State and Governments on Climate Change for your consideration. The Committee of African Heads of State and Climate Change convened this morning at the Africa Union headquarters here in Addis Ababa. Climate change, Mr. Chairman, remains the existential threat, particularly for vulnerable regions such as Africa. Last year was the hottest on record, surpassing the 1.5 degree Celsius threshold set under the Paris Agreement for the first time. Africa continues to bear the brunt of extreme climate impacts, prolonged droughts in southern Africa, severe flooding in east and west, wildfires, and expanding desertification have slowed, in some cases reversed, socio-economic progress across the continent. Meanwhile, global geopolitical uncertainty and rising emissions are complicating multilateral climate action. A decline in global partnerships, coupled with increasing protectionist policies, is diverting investments away from addressing shared global challenges. In response to these realities, the committee convened to assess Africa's climate responses and global engagements and to chart a path forward. The committee reviewed the outcomes of the recent UN Climate Conference, COP29, held in Baku, Azerbaijan from the 11th to 23rd of November last year. Africa presented a unified voice at COP29 with strong participation from African leaders, ministers, and experts. While the conference made some progress on key issues such as climate finance, adaptation, and carbon markets, the outcomes fell short of Africa's expectation. On climate finance, the commitment by developed countries to mobilize at least US $300 billion by 2025 is far below Africa's demand of 1.3 trillion annually. Nevertheless, Africa must actively engage in discussions to ensure that the roadmap towards the 1.3 trillion US dollars target is finalized at the next COP in Brazil. COP29 concluded negotiations on carbon markets, which beyond climate benefits hold the potential to generate significant economic and social gains for Africa. Several high-level African-led events were held at COP29, including discussions on measuring Africa's green growth that was sponsored by Africa Development Bank, Congo-Brazzaville, and Kenya. The recommendations from these events will be considered by the Assembly. The committee expressed concern over the limited investment in Africa's energy sector, which accounts for only 1% of global energy investments, despite widespread energy poverty and Africa's vast renewable energy potential. The committee welcomed the outcomes of the recent Africa Summit on Mission 300 held in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, which aims to accelerate energy access across the continent. The Assembly is also requested to consider institutionalizing Africa's Green Industrialization Initiative and the Accelerated Partnership for Renewable Energy in Africa, both launched at COP28 in Dubai. In this regard, Mr. Chairman, the committee welcomed the support of the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat and its partners for these Pan-African initiatives. The committee appreciated the financial and institutional support provided by Afrexim Bank, the Africa Development Bank, and other stakeholders in sponsoring Pavilion at COPs, which serves as a hub for African events. Reports from the Africa Union Climate Commissions and a co-host, including the Africa Islands Commission, the Congo Basin Commission, and the Sahel Region Commission were received, and the committee acknowledged the programs and projects implemented under these bodies. The committee also reviewed follow-up actions from the inaugural Africa Climate Summit in 2023, including the Assembly's decision to hold summit biannually. Within the next 2 weeks, Mr. Chairman, we will receive proposals from countries interested in hosting the second Africa Climate Summit to be held in the first week of September 2025 in collaboration with the Africa Union Commission. Kenya is prepared to host the summit The committee requests the Assembly's endorsement unless negotiations with other countries are concluded. Excellencies, climate change is now a central issue in international finance, development, peace, and security. It is imperative that the Assembly strengthens its engagement on climate matters. Excellencies, the report and decisions of CAHO's meeting previously circulated have been refined. The Secretariat will share the final version for your consideration and adoption. I take this opportunity to thank CAHO's members for their active participation and valuable contribution. Excellencies, I submit this report for the adoption and endorsement of the Africa Union Assembly, and I thank you for your attention. Your Excellency Chair, allow me now to report on the institutional reform of the Africa Union. Excellencies, a year ago, this Assembly entrusted me with the pivotal responsibility of championing institutional reforms within the Africa Union. Since then, I have engaged in extensive consultations with key AU stakeholders to assess the progress of our reform agenda. These engagements have included discussions with the leadership of the Africa Union Commission, including the chairperson, Musa Faki, the AU Institutional Reform Unit Secretariat, the Permanent Representative Committee, or PRC, here in Addis Ababa, the AU High Representative for Financing, and the leadership of the Pan-African Parliament. Additionally, on 27 January 2025, I convened a high-level retreat in Nairobi attended by presidents of Comoro, Guinea-Bissau, Ethiopia, and Ghana, alongside the AUC chairperson and foreign affairs ministers from Mauritania, Rwanda, and Tunisia. The resounding message from this consultation was clear and unequivocal. Africa must complete its reform process with urgency and decisiveness. Excellencies, it is evident that progress has been made in restructuring AU organs, institutions, and offices. Of the 57 AU entities earmarked for reform, 42 have been assessed, and the report is currently under consideration by the Permanent Representatives Committee. I therefore propose that this Assembly directs the PRC, with the support of AUC, to conclude its review of the 42 entities and submit a report to the Executive Council during its session in July later this year. The study on the division of labor between the Africa Union Regional Economic Committees and member states was completed in December 2024 and submitted to the Africa Union Commission chairperson. It was subsequently circulated to all Africa Union commissioners, CEOs of RECs, and was held and representatives from 14 member states. A retreat, Mr. Chairman, was held from 6 to 7 February this year to review the report. I propose that this Assembly directs the relevant AU stakeholders to expedite its consideration and ensure that clear recommendations are presented at the Media Coordinating Summit meeting in July 2025. Excellencies, based on my consultations and careful observations, I submit the following 8 proposals to accelerate and complete the Africa Union reform process for your keen consideration. Number 1, to maintain the momentum of reforms, enhance oversight, and entrench collective ownership, the Africa Union reform process requires a consistent strategic guidance at the highest level. I propose the formation of a 5-member ad hoc committee of heads of state and government chaired by the champion. The 5 members of the Bureau could form the rest of the membership of this oversight committee of heads of state. Number 2, to consolidate the pace of progress, I recommend that this Assembly authorizes an extraordinary summit in July 2025 within the Media Coordination Summit dedicated solely to the Africa Union reform agenda. This will allow for final consultations with AU stakeholders, including the newly elected Commission, and the submission of concrete proposals for the final phase of our reforms. The African Union, number 3, the African Court of Justice is a crucial pillar of our governance architecture, yet its implementation has stalled since 2009 due to the discussions of merging it with the African Court of Human and People's Rights. I propose, Mr. Chairman, that this Assembly mandates the African Union Commission and PRC to finalize the Court's operational requirements, including budgetary provisions, and that the Executive Council conducts judicial elections during its ordinary session in July this year. There is a need, number 4, there is a need for the Pan-African Parliament to evolve from a symbolic entity into a legislative force. So far, only 15 member states have ratified the Malabo Protocol, which seeks to grant the Pan-African Parliament permanent membership and legislative authority. I urge this Assembly to mobilize political support to accelerate the ratification process. Number 5, the 2018 AU Assembly decision called for a clear categorization of AU decisions to enhance implementation. Yet 7 years later, the absence of structured mechanisms that lead to inefficiencies and weak enforcement, I propose that this Assembly directs the African Union Commission and the Office of the Legal Counsel to complete the categorization of African Union decisions without further delay to ensure clarity, accountability, and effective execution. Number 6, the dire peace and security situation in Africa partly indicts the continent's peace architecture. Africa Peace and Security Architecture, APSA, therefore needs to be strengthened to respond effectively to emerging security threats, including terrorism. I recommend that this Assembly authorizes the African Union Commission chairperson, in consultation with the champion, to appoint a panel of 5 eminent African experts to review AU's peace and security framework within the next 4 months. Number 7, despite Decisions 635 of 2017, limiting the AU summit agenda to 3 strategic areas, the summit program remains overly broad. I propose that this Assembly reinforces Decision 635 by delegating non-strategic matters to the Executive Council and recommends a review of the Assembly's format at the extraordinary summit in July this year. Number 8, 10 years ago in Johannesburg and Kigali, member states committed to funding 100% of African Union operational budget, 75% of program budget, and 25% of peace support operations, targets that remain unmet to date. I propose that this Assembly directs the Executive Council to convene an extraordinary session with finance ministers to develop a roadmap for achieving these targets within 5 years. To guide this process, I further propose that the Assembly directs Dr. Donald Kaberuka, AU High Representative for Financing the Union, to develop a concept note and discussion paper to guide the proposed joint ministerial meeting. I wish to take this opportunity to make some observations on the report of the Chair on the state of the peace and security in our continent that was earlier adopted. Kenya underscores the urgent need to intensify efforts in creating an enabling environment to navigate current vulnerabilities and address emerging threats and risks. To this end, Kenya remains steadfast in anchoring the search for peace in our region. In South Sudan, Kenya continues to engage with all parties through the Tumaini Initiative to foster lasting peace and stability. In Sudan, we urge an immediate cessation of hostilities, robust response to the worsening humanitarian crisis, and unwavering support for a Sudanese-led transition. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, alongside the Southern Africa Development Community, we have outlined a pathway towards de-escalation and peace. This framework was adopted by the African Union Peace and Security Council, and I call upon the international community to rally behind the joint Nairobi-Luanda initiatives to ensure its success.